Hello everybody and welcome to this simple tutorial on Visual Basic, and we'll be talking about functions, procedures, and encapsulation. We'll be talking about that also inside of Visual Studio 2022. It's an updated version of Visual Studio and you don't have any problems if you're using that. Even if you're using an older version, you'll still be fine. The menus and the UI might look a little different, but it does exactly the same thing, so don't worry about it. Before we get started, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you share this with your friends and people who are not your friends. You share that with them too. And then make them your friends because you shared it with them. So you know how it goes. All right, well, let's get started on this. We're talking today about Visual Studio and VisualBasic.net. So let's start off with VisualBasic.net. VisualBasic.net is a programming language. So obviously, that's what we're here to learn is Visual Basic. So I put in Google, what is VB.net? And here's what we find. VB.net, or Visual Basic, is a programming language developed by Microsoft for building applications. It's an object-oriented language that's part of the .NET framework. Let me move this over just a little bit. So we now know it's part of the .NET framework. So that brings up another question. What is the .NET framework? What is the .NET framework? So I go ahead and go into Google. Let's search for what is the .NET framework. The .NET framework is a software development framework created by Microsoft, primarily used to build and run applications on Windows operating systems. To put simply, let me go ahead and click on this link. To put simply, it is a set of code and libraries that makes it easier for you to develop Windows applications, even Android applications, and Visual Studio, Visual Basic, let's say, Visual Basic, not Visual Studio. Visual Basic sits on top of that or is within that. So you see you have the CLR libraries, you have the WinForms, ASP.NET, so on and so forth, and you have the languages here, which is where VB.NET and C# and all the other ones reside. So you don't have to go too deep into this right now, but understand it's part of this whole ecosystem that allows you to build applications with ease. Now, within the description here, or the definition of Visual Basic as a language, it also mentioned this object-oriented language. So we need to answer that. What is an object-oriented language? Well, to put simply, object-oriented language is a language that uses object-oriented programming. And that is a common computer programming style, organized software around objects rather than logic and functions. So everything is an object in object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming is based on the ideas of abstract data types, mathematical disciplines that store data, and the procedures to process it. To put simply, everything's an object. Just like you have your car, you have your animals, you have your buildings, and they can be described in many different ways with attributes and color and so on and so forth. So we'll go deeper into that later on, but understand it as simple as that. Everything's an object in object-oriented programming, including letters and numbers and symbols. Now, the thing we need to understand is that all of this is done inside of an IDE. An IDE stands for an Integrated Development Environment. And if you've done the previous videos, you know we are currently using the Visual Studios 2022 for our IDE. Visual Studio is an integrated development environment, like I just mentioned, IDE, and it allows us to create computer programs. And it hosts all of that stuff that we talked about before. The .NET framework, it hosts the languages, and it allows us with ease to build our applications. It's our working environment. In essence, if you were building a car, you might have a garage, right? Or if you're going to bake a cake, you will have your kitchen, and you'll have all the tools that go in there. The IDE is just that. It is our working environment with all the tools that we need to make what we need to make. So in this video, we want to talk about encapsulation within VisualBasic.net. So what's encapsulation? Encapsulation in the context of classes and methods is a fundamental object-oriented programming concept where data, variables, and the operations that can be performed on that data, which is methods, are bundled together within a single unit or like a function or a class. This is called classes. Within those classes, we have functions. I added that part just so you can understand. To restrict direct access to the data and control how it can be modified. Now, that's a lot of stuff said, but to put this simply, encapsulation is no different than, let's say, a carton of eggs, right? You instead of going to the store, grabbing the eggs with your hands, you put them in the carton, or they put them in the carton for you. They encapsulate it in the carton, so you just take the carton and not each individual egg. And I wouldn't suspect that I should find a carton of eggs inside of a package of cookies. So those cookies are specifically that container is specifically designed to host cookies, not eggs, and so on and so forth. We can go down the list for beans or whatever is contained is encapsulated in there. It's designed for that data, for that for those elements, right? So think of it that way. A lot of times when you're thinking of these things, you want to think of them outside of programming so that way you get an understanding. And that's actually the essence of object oriented programming, that you're supposed to think in real terms. So basically, I can have something like this where these apples right here is my data, and this box is my class. So I can just go ahead and take these apples and put them in my box, which is my class. So they're all encapsulated. Think of it that simply. So now we know when we say VB.NET or VisualBasic.NET is a programming language developed by Microsoft for building applications, and we know that building applications will be in our Visual Studio IDE, our working environment, and it's an object-oriented language that's part of the .NET framework. We understand what the .NET framework is, to an extent that we can move forward and not have to dive deep into it. And we also understand what an object-oriented programming language is. At least we have a way of thinking about it, that way we can move forward and not be stuck on it. So as you know, with any of my videos on programming or attention-driven design, everything starts with a story. So before we get started programming, let's get some idea of what we want to do. I'm going to choose from one of these pathways here, and I can say if I want it to be a big brain story, pathway 1, pathway 2. I can take a previous story and compare it from there. Pathway 3, I can choose one of Malik's originals. And what that would be is probably one of the movies that I can select here, maybe Singularity, Rage, or something like that. And I can choose from any of those. Now, obviously, we're using this not to really just watch the movie, but to have something outside of programming that we can use and be able to add to our programming, the language itself or our application itself. Wait a minute, let me refresh this. I don't think this is the update. Okay, so here's the updated page for this. And if you are following along from, let's say, something like a Canvas and you have this, then you should be able to see this updated page. If you're not, then you can follow along with me on this video and just use this as a test for yourself. So I have 4 pathways. I can take this big brain battle, come up with my own story using an avatar that I properly have in my mind or I previously created. This pathway 2 is a comparison, and we go all the way down to the original movies created by that I'm in. So you can go ahead and select any of these movies, select this link over here, and it'll send you to those movies if you want to do a review on those. But I'm going to choose the Substack here. So I'm going to choose either Build Up, Learners.cloud, or Malik's Substack Paradox. I can select any one. It doesn't really matter. You can go ahead and subscribe if you want more updates on the Substack. And once you do that, or you just go inside of here, and you can choose one of these articles to sort of write your review on, Brain City, whatever it might be, right? So you select one of those. And then we can use that part of our program. So now, after we choose that, now we have some context we can use that we say, okay, I'm going to now start this conditional programming, and I'm going to write me a program that hosts that information. So with that said, what I'm going to now do is go ahead and open up Visual Studio. And here I have Visual Studio open. And I'm going to go ahead and start a brand new project. Go to Create New Project. And from here, we're going to choose not C Sharp, we're going to choose Visual Basic. We're going to keep it for Windows. And let's go with desktop application. And we can choose Windows Forms, WPF application, and so on and so forth. We're going to go ahead and choose this WPF application, Visual Basic Windows Desktop. Yours should look similar to mine. So I'm going to select that, go next. And then you want to change this to whatever your project will be. Mine was the Substack, and I didn't choose one. Let me just choose Death of the Expert. I'll choose something like that. And maybe I'll just take that name from here, read up on some of this, and do something like this. Now, your app doesn't have to be the same thing. You know, you can write a review separately and then add it to the app, have it linked to the app, or just add the review in the app and make sure it's just part of your process so you have something that you know that you're building towards. So right here, I have my name, and then I will go ahead and put my location, and then I go ahead and add this check mark here to place the solution in the project in the same directory. Go next. So here I am in Visual Studio. On my left-hand side, we are going to want our tools over here. So you should see a little tab here that says Toolbox. In order to keep that toolbox here, I'm going to pin it. This is where we have all our buttons and our text and all that kind of stuff. Over here is my Solutions Explorer. And this hosts all of the files and everything that makes my application run. Down here you have XAML, which is kind of like HTML, like a website. And it describes what's up here. So whatever I put up here will write down here, and whatever I write down here will go up here. For now, let's go ahead and ignore this part. This is called the XAML area. We'll ignore that so that way we can focus on developing our application. Now, we want to focus on functions and procedures. Well, there's a couple of ways we can do that. First, step one, we're going to add ourselves a button. So in our toolbox, we're going to go here to button. And if you don't see your toolbox, you can go to View, Toolbox. And if you don't see your Solutions panel, you can do the same thing to get to the Solutions Explorer. So, but for right now, we're going to add this button. I'm going to drag this button over here, and I'm going to drag that control handle, and I'm going to make it very big. Once you select the button, you see it selected because you can see these little parameters over here. I mean, these, control handles. I can get to the properties of this button by right-clicking and going to Properties, opening up the Properties panel. It went to the opposite screen, so let me drag this over to this screen. There we go. So this is my Properties panel. This has all the attributes of what make this button a button, including the button's name that I'm going to need in order to program this button. So with this button selected, I go to the name property, and I name this BTN. Let's say story, since I'm going to put some information, my review inside of there. Now, keep in mind, you can make this whatever you want. You can do it as I'm doing it with another idea with this review, or with an idea within this review. It really doesn't matter. It's up to you. So now what I need to do here is I need to change the label on this button. So right here, that label says button. I don't want it to say button. I want it to go down here to say enter. So I put enter into the content area, and now you can see right there the button says enter. So now I have a button. Now the next thing I want to do is go ahead and code this button. A couple of things. Number one, you don't want to double click everywhere because it's going to write some code for you. Number two, you can do this a couple of ways to be able to make this button write some code for us on this back end. So with every WPF application and with every VB application you'll be doing in Visual Studio, it has two views. One is the UI view that we were just working in when we were at our button, and then there's the view code view. Now, this code view is where we put all our code, all our logic, all the brains behind everything. And this front view is where we put all our UI. If we want to get to those views without selecting these tabs up here, we can go over here to the Solutions Explorer, and we can see right here, this is the front view, because you can see it says XAML there. And right under that, it's the main window.xaml.vb. That's the code view. If I double clicked on any of these, I'll go to each one of those tabs will open up. So right now, this button has no functions connected to it. If I go back here, you don't see anything back there having to do with this button. So I want to automatically create a function or procedure connected to this button. I can go in the back and write it, or I can use a shortcut by double clicking it after I named it. So I named it, and I'm gonna double click it. And now you see it wrote this procedure here. This is a procedure. What makes it a procedure? Well, I think it's better for us to understand that when we create a function. But basically, to make it as simple as possible, a procedure has no return value inside of VB, whereas a function has a return value. It's basically that simple. So for right now, if I were to press this button, in between this part right here and this bottom part, the end, that's where the logic goes here inside of this function. Right now we have no logic, so nothing will happen. So I'm going to test this out by hitting play. And here's the application. If I hit enter, nothing happens. Exactly how I suspected it should be. So now let's make something happen with our procedure. Let's dissect this procedure for a second. Number one, we have this private declaration, which means it only exists inside of this class, and no other class can use it. This sub indicates that it's a procedure, and this name right here is just the name of it. We could have named that anything, but that's the name of it. And inside of the arguments area, we have this variable, which is an object. That object is called sender. We have another variable called E, and that E is a routed event arguments. And we say what handles this function, which is the BTN story. Remember, we created that. And it's the click event on that button that handles all of this. Now, no need to memorize all that for now, but understand that we connected our button on the front to this function, which we can do to any function, but we did it for this function when we double clicked it. So let's go ahead and make something happen. Let's make our own procedure. I'm going to first create some place where I can write some message on my screen. So let's go here and I'm gonna find a label. And I'm going to drag that label here. And if you can't select something, you see how it's becoming difficult for me to select this thing here. If you can't select something, you can go down here inside of the XAML and select it. Now I see there's something going on with this label. I'm going to delete that label and I'm going to try it again. Where's my label? Right here. I'm going to just drag it right there. There, that looks much better. And then I can resize that label. And remember, the first thing I need to do is I need to name this label. I'm going to name this LBL message. Okay. And you can add as many labels as you want, as many text boxes, images, that kind of stuff. But this will give you a pretty good sense of what you can do very simply with functions and procedures. So I'm going to go back here. Now I am going to create myself a procedure. And I'm going to start off by saying sub, because it is a procedure, and then I'm going to give it a name. Greet user. And from here, I go ahead and close off since I'm not taking any arguments. And then I'll hit enter. It should automatically give me an end sub, and it does. So now I have two procedures. I have this procedure up here, and I have this procedure down here. Now, I did not put private on that procedure, so this procedure is public, meaning if another class tried to use it, it'll be available to it. We'll talk about that later. But now let's go ahead and add, when we hit enter, to our label. So down here, I'm going to start typing LBL because I named it LBL message, and I should see message right there. So I'm gonna call LBL message, and I'm gonna call LBL message dot content, and I'm going to put a message inside that content by first hitting equals, double quotes, and then I'm going to go ahead and type in my message. Hello world. For now, this is just a test. Control S to save that, and we can try our function, but it should not work. And if you can see why it shouldn't work, you're doing very well. Let you look at that for a second. But let me go ahead and run it. You'll see. So I'm running this. There's my label. Hit enter. Nothing happens. Why? Well, because this procedure is connected to our button right here. Here's how we can see. I selected this button. If I go down to my XAML down here, what I'll see is there is the button name here, and then there's the actual name right here, right? When I click on this button here, or click on this button here, I can go over to this area here to the Events tab, and I can see under the click, it has that name, that BTN story underscore click. If I were to double click on that, it'll bring me right inside of this function here, which nothing is happening. But this is a procedure where something is happening. So if I wanted this procedure to run when the button click, I need to take this procedure name and I need to run it inside of the button click procedure. So now I'm actually using procedures in a very neat way to where I don't have to rewrite anything. I can just use it as many times as I want. So now when I hit play and then I hit enter, you can see it says hello world. So if I wanted to make this into, let's say, something relevant or within context of the story I selected online on the Malik paradox, I can just go ahead and take whatever text that I want. I'm going to copy that text and I'm going to just put it right inside of there. So there it is. And if I were to go inside of here and I hit enter, I can go to new lines of code. Hit save, hit F5, run it, enter, and there's my text there. So at least it's in context, right? I can add a review here or whatever I want. All right, so now that I have that function, that procedure, let's look at a function. So procedure didn't return anything, it simply did some stuff. If I wanted this to be a function, then it would return something, meaning when I run the function, it does something and then it returns something. Let's do something very simple. Let's say like if I were to create a function that was to calculate two variables. So first of all, I start off with the keyword function. And then I give the function a name. And then I say, what arguments does this function take? So I put that in parentheses, and then I will say number1, num1, and that num1 variable will be an integer. Okay, and then I'm gonna say it's gonna take another variable called num2, and that number 2 will be as an integer. And then from there, I'm going to say as integer. Now, what does that mean? That means it will take a number 1. It will also take in as arguments a number 2, and it will return an integer. Now, when I hit enter, it should close off that function. Without this part, it will give me an error because a function, as you recall, must return something. That's why we have this here. So now let's go ahead and add up those numbers. So all I have to do here is say num1 plus num2. So I'll hit return num1 plus num2. So what that's going to do is take this number and then that number, add them together and return them as an integer. So let's see this work. I'm going to go ahead and run this function inside of here. So I have this LBL content equals all of this, but now let's just change this for a second and say that content equals this, which will give us an error. Why? Because number one, this right here, this function takes in two variables. So I have to put those variables in there, separating them with commas. So I'm going to say 4, comma 2. Okay. This may give us an error because this returns an integer, but the content expecting a string. But let's see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and run that. And I'm going to hit enter. And it worked, but this is not how we would want to do that because VB is making the conversion for us. 6, we would probably want to convert that to a string, but it's converting to a string for us, so we don't have a problem right now. But there is our return value, 6. As you can see, add numbers did 4 plus 2. And we can change that to see it work still. Control S, F5. We have 8. So this is a simple example of encapsulation. We have this class encloses all this information, but it is not the complete example of encapsulation because I would have to show you how this works using another class, but I'll save that for another video so this doesn't get too complicated. So for right now, we have the difference between a function, which we have the keyword function plus the name and anything that takes something in. For instance, I don't need to have variables here. I don't need to have arguments here. I'll give you an example of a function that doesn't have those arguments. So I'll say a function name message, and it doesn't have any arguments, but it has to return something. So I have to put what it returns as a string. I'm going to make this return a string, and I'm going to go ahead and close that. And this is a perfectly fine function. So what do I hit return? I have to return. Oops. So what will I return? I will return a string. And what string will I return? Maybe I'll return something like this here. No, let's say like something like what the greeting had. Yeah. So remember that text that the greeting had. So I'm just going to go ahead and add the quotes there. And I'm going to put some of that text that I had before from the Substack. Put that in there. And just so it's readable, I'm going to do something like that. Control S, F5, and we should not be getting the message because we never put it inside of the enter button. We still have the 8. So in order for me to make this message work, I would have to put it inside of the btnstory.click. I'm just going to go like that. Let's see. I'm going to comment that out. You see I put that apostrophe, and VB, the apostrophe creates a comment, meaning it's not going to compile. If I wanted a note, I would say, this is, I'm making this out of a comment. This is a comment. And you can put links. Let's say if I wanted to remember the link to the Substack, I can put that inside of a comment. And it won't have any problem. So now the only thing that should run is this message here. So now if I hit run, when I hit enter, that ran. But why didn't it show up inside of the label? Well, let's go check. So right now we have our message. Our message is a function. It returns this, but we never told it what to do with that return value. We just ran it and did nothing with it. So what we would want to do is put it inside of that txt label.content. So we're going to take whatever this returns, put it into that content. Now we should be able to see something. And there we have it. So now you know the difference between functions and procedures. To put it very simply, functions return a value, procedures do not. And now we understand some element of encapsulation. Hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys the next time.